Okay, so here comes. This is my first video in English, and this is my first video about Christian spirituality. Uh, this channel is supposed to be the history of Christian spirituality in the Middle Ages, which nobody does on YouTube, I think. I mean, like, nobody does what I want to do, which is kind of scary. Well, my only hope is that nobody is gonna see this video actually, because my mother doesn't understand English. Well, she does a little bit. Well, so here we go. The first video is about the concept of spirituality and what spirituality is and how we come to this definition, how it functions. I think we start from opening this. For the good start. So, why I think I have right to speak about these subjects. My point of view is quite specific because I have my master's in theology, in Christian theology, Catholic. My background is in the Catholic Church, and my PhD is in medieval history. So I kind of sit on a fence between theology and history, which sounds like an uncomfortable position, but actually I am quite comfortable because I do read medieval texts and medieval mysticism, and so it doesn't appear as such a big gap in the material that I am dealing with. But sitting on this fence, I kind of developed an idea of what my field of study actually is, and I call it the history of spirituality. Of course, it is a recognized discipline. It exists, but it's not a very respectable one, because spirituality is not considered a proper research field. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just type spirituality into Google or into YouTube search and see what comes up, if those results have anything to do with science, knowledge, or any kind of reason, because probably they won't. They won't make sense at all. Spirituality functions in today's culture as something inherently non-scientific, impossible to grasp, impossible to define, and as basically as a kind of mumbo jumbo. The educated people do not talk about such things. It doesn't ring very well. So my field, which I called History of Christian Women's Spirituality in the Latin Middle Ages, is a very specific one. That's why I hope nobody is going to watch this video. And I limit myself mostly to Northern Europe. That I will explain in the next video. Why North, and what do I understand by that? So here we are with this concept of spirituality, which is this non-scientific, private, actually very private. I mean, we know what spirituality is, but we do not talk about it. It's much more private than sex, actually. So it is believed that it should not be appropriate for a historian to go hunting for invisible spirits. We should stick to the documents. But what if the authors of the documents are concerned with spirits? What if they believe in miracles? Because it just so happens that spirituality was quite important to medieval people. I'm not claiming to have any special connection with medieval people or that I know what they were thinking better than anyone else, but we have to acknowledge there are questions and problems, and above all, connections between those questions and problems that were clear and important to medieval people, and they are not clearly visible to us because the place of spirituality in our society is much different from theirs. But it turns out that there is a number of definitions of spirituality that try to pinpoint it as a real world phenomenon and therefore a valid research topic. So I would try to come up with a definition of spirituality. Actually, my favorite definition of spirituality comes not from historical science, but from a whole different world, the world of medical sciences, which is my other dwelling place. I am soon to be a registered nurse, so I encounter this definition because the concept of spirituality is useful to medical professionals and to nurses in particular, because there appears to be a vital connection between spirituality and suffering. And alleviating pain, suffering, is at the core of a nursing profession. Pain is a very complex phenomenon and not just physiological. Pain is multidimensional because human beings are complex and multidimensional. We know this from Cicely Saunders, the founder of the first hospices, who coined the concept of total pain, meaning pain encompassing all dimensions of a human person, physical, psychological, social, and spiritual dimension. And each of these dimensions of pain must be addressed by a nurse who is always focused on the patient's needs. The needs in nursing are described based on the classic Maslow pyramid of needs. And at the foundation of this pyramid are the basic physiological needs: air to breathe, water, food, shelter. Then there are the psychological needs for acceptance or belonging or love. And at the summit of the pyramid, there are the spiritual needs. So Maslow considers those needs to be universal for all human beings. So we can assume that spiritual pain can affect anyone, not just those who consider themselves believer within a particular faith or religion. So the nurses actually use a definition of spiritual pain. It reads as follows: spiritual pain is a self-defined experience of personal discomfort or actual or potential harm triggered by a threat to a person's relationship with God or a higher power. Spiritual pain becomes clinically significant when it interferes with one's functionality and prevents one from entering the transcendent spaces of spiritual practices temporarily or permanently. We can see in this definition that spiritual suffering is something real for medicine, as it can significantly impact patients' functioning. That's what clinically significant means. In other words, if it hurts, it exists. There must be some organ of this pain, some function or need that occurs frequently enough in Homo sapiens to be possible to observe and to define. I have chosen to use this definition even though it comes from outside the historical field, and to adapt it to my historical research, because it clearly shows spirituality as something clinically significant. That means existing, and in my case it would be something present in historical sources. The notion of spirituality and spiritual pain is not therefore a part of my interpretation of the source, but it's a part of critical analysis. It is something I probe for in the text itself. In this definition, we can already see a concept of relationship with God or a higher power that would be the core in the definition of spirituality. So we are now slowly coming from the definition of spiritual pain to the definition of spirituality itself. The definition that is most appealing to me reads as follows. Spirituality is defined as personal views and behaviors that express a relationship with a transcendent dimension or something greater than oneself. So we are talking here about personal views and behaviors that find expression. We can assume that or pose a hypothesis that those expressions can also be found in historical documents. And if they are found in historical documents, they can be identified, analyzed, and placed in context, which would probably contribute to a better understanding of the text itself. So I want to stress here that we are not talking about religious texts only. If spirituality is this universal human need or organ we have, and its function is searching for this transcendental connection, we cannot assume that it only finds shape in religious thinking and writing. I try to better explain this difference between spirituality and religion. I define religion as something one does, as a system of social practices connecting the believers. Religion is a social phenomenon, a community intended to facilitate the practices. In other words, if I had to explain what religion is in one word, I would use this quote from the Gospel of Luke. Master, what must I do to inherit eternal life? It's about doing. What must I do to inherit eternal life? And you ask this question to a certain person, your master, be it Jesus or Buddha or some other master. And in response, you receive a series of commandments or advice to follow. And this advice is the same or is common for all the followers of religion. And spirituality is not about practices so much, but about attitudes or needs. In one sentence, I would sum it up using the verse from Psalm 27. When you said, "Seek my face," my heart said to you, "Your face, Lord, I will seek." Your face, Lord, I will seek. It is a search. Spirituality is a search for the face of God that nobody can see and live, which is a paradox in itself, because it is always longing. It is always a search. It is something that's basically moving in the dark. And it is indeed very private and finds various expressions in various people, even belonging to the same religion. In the world I live in, that is the Nordic part of the Western Europe, the concept of spirituality becomes particularly handy to describe the attitudes of contemporary people towards religion and God since the decline of organized church. In Denmark, the whole 80% of people declare that they do believe in God, but only 2% attend a Sunday service. We can see this huge discrepancy between the need or the sense of faith or believe, or spirituality, that they do believe in God, and basically non-existent religious practice. But if they declare that they believe in God, why don't we use the word faith or belief instead of spirituality? Well, I think there is a difference. I consider faith to be something much more tangible than spirituality. Faith is one's individual attitude towards a series of claims set by a religion. One believes in something or someone, and one can intellectually reflect upon one's faith. Christianity, Islam, or Judaism are built upon those faith claims, but there also exist religions that do not require their followers to believe in a system of doctrines. They operate directly in this borderland between spirituality and religion, and they focus on ritual and experience rather than on doctrines. Ancient Greek and Roman religions were like that. It was important to take part in rituals, but if you ask the followers what they believe, they would give you various answers, because there was no credo, there was no set doctrinal foundation in this religion. It was just not so important. It's fascinating to see these complex relationships between religion, faith, and spirituality in the Christian sources from the Middle Ages, when organized religion was at its peak, and one could almost regard the Christian religion and spirituality as being identical, because everyone were Christian. But I think that knowing the concept of spirituality opens up for new sources and new connections that would not be easy to grasp and pinpoint only with the concept of religion and faith. Since spirituality is much more individual and universal, we can ask the texts a variety of new questions. For example, how does the speaker relate to God in this text? How does he feel towards God? What does he hope for in eternal life? Does he consider himself spiritually connected or alienated? With this set of questions, we can approach not only religious texts, but also poetry, very much poetry, letters, sagas, and almost any other literary genre. So the study of spirituality in the Middle Ages would be asking a specific set of questions to the text and searching for the answers. Using those questions, we can identify conceptual connections and relationships between texts that give similar or various answers to those questions about spirituality that we wouldn't be able to notice otherwise. And this potentially would lead to a deeper contextual reading of texts. Yes, so that was that. That was my definition of spirituality, and why I think it's interesting. Next video will be about the Norse, the concept of Norse and the spirituality in the Norse, why I think it is something distinctive from the south of Europe. Yes, so thank you for... And then we'll see. I want to read texts, right? I want to read texts. I want to read St. Birgitta of Sweden and her Sermon Gallicus. I want to talk to people who know more about those topics than I do. We'll see if there is any interest. So thank you for this first video, and like and subscribe. See you next time.